Boys, STEM 25 is going to look at how does training affect performance, and we're going to be looking here at anxiety and arousal, in particular looking at trait and state anxiety, the sources of stress, and optimum arousal. The first type of anxiety is trait anxiety. And you see the picture here of LeBron James biting his fingernails, trying to give the idea here that trait anxiety is based off somebody with a certain personality that are going to see things as threatening. So as it says here, it says a personality type that has a tendency towards perceiving conceivably non-dangerous situations as threatening or non-threatening. So the athletes that have a high level of trait anxiety will tend to be more anxious when confronted with a threatening situation, i.e. sports performance. So if we go back up the top here, when it talks about trait anxiety is personality type that has a tendency towards perceiving conceivably non-dangerous situations as threatening or non-threatening. Those athletes with a high level of trait anxiety will be seeing most of these activities or situations as threatening. So for example, here is LeBron James might be having to do something in the game. He might be very nervous. A student being asked by Brother Patrick during an assembly to walk up to the stage and speak about debating or to speak about a sports performance, that individual might be very nervous or very threatening for them, and that's a form of trait anxiety. So I've already spoke this, but I'll go through it again. Athletes with a high level of trait anxiety will tend to be more anxious when confronted with a threatening situation. They are likely to become more anxious prior to competition. So, for example, some boys might be very sick in the sheds, or they might be feel funny in their stomach, they might have a lot of nerves, they might be very, they can't sit still, very fidgety. That's because of their trait anxiety. They're a little bit nervous about the performance they're about to do, and they see it as more as a threatening situation. An example of this, and I can relate this to my own football team last year, is where a team which loses 5 games in a row will continue to see things in a negative way and continue to lose or accept it will happen. So teams or players within that team get into a situation where they might only be behind by a few points with not long to go in the game, but because of their personality type and their trait anxiety, they can't see themselves winning the game. So therefore, they're unable to lose and they just accept, we're going to lose again, which is the Para Eels Toyota Cup team last year. So that's trait anxiety. State anxiety, as it says here, is an emotional response of an athlete to threatening demands or dangers to a particular situation. So, for example, Shaquille O'Neal used to have a very poor free throw shooting record, and he never liked that part of the game. However, he was a very good basketballer. So we're not talking about going out and playing basketball and Shaquille O'Neal gets himself, in a state of anxiety, very emotional. It's not that at all. The basketball problem is not a drama. He goes out and plays very well. But when he gets called to the free throw line because of his poor shooting record, automatically, emotionally, he's thinking in a negative way about his performance he's about to do. So, and as a result of this, some of the symptoms of state anxiety may include sweaty hands and nervousness. So as he's walking up to the free throw line after the foul's been committed, his hands might become very sweaty. He might get very nervous, start to feel a bit funny in his stomach because the expectation is that he's going to miss the free throws. An example may be a golfer suddenly becoming over-aroused when they have to putt in front of a large crowd. That's another example of state anxiety. So it's the emotional response. It's sort of the emotional insides of a person and how they'll deal with the situation. Getting very nervous, getting sweaty hands, starting to sweat. So focusing and concentration, which we'll look at later on in the next couple of stems, will help them block out noise and expectations of others and allow the task to be completed. So just to recap between the two, trait anxiety is going to be the personality type. Some boys who might have to go out and do some form of performance, walk up and talk on stage, kick a goal, whatever it may be, putting, driving a golf ball, whatever it might be, get very, very nervous and see that as a threatening situation and not like it. Others may have no problems with it. So that's an impact of the trait anxiety. So trait anxiety is personality type, those that are very nervous, whereas state anxiety is more of the emotional response of an athlete to a situation or an element of the activity they're about to do. An example we gave with Shaquille O'Neal was the free throw. The next one we're going to look at here is some of the sources of stress. What may cause stress to an athlete? There are many sources of stress in our lives, and each person's source will be different. Stress can come from internal or external sources, which may be under the control of the athlete. In the sport, sources of stress include levels of trait anxiety, which we already spoke about, the personality type, how nervous the person gets, that's going to cause some stress for them, their personal experiences, support structures, injury or illness, spectators, media, skill level, fitness, pressure from coaches and family. This is a little graph here, or a little table I should say, talks about some of the sources of stress. On the left, up the top here, we've got under the athlete's control, internal and external. So there's goes down a list of a number of things there, from self-esteem to personal expectations, mental rehearsal, how they cope with it. External might be the skills, reaction to the opposition, focusing on the event. Then these ones are not under the athlete's control. Internal might be an injury, an illness, the A trait, again, their personality, which they can't really change, or previous successes or failures. And the external ones here, which they can't control, obviously be spectators, audience, media, expectations from others, such as coaches, and the opposition. So these are some different things here of the sources of stress that athletes can control internally, externally, and things that, sources that athletes can't control both internally and also externally. How does training affect performance? Still staying here, we're going to look now at optimum arousal. And there are two major theories that are used for arousal when we're talking about sport, getting people motivated to play. First one being the drive theory, and the second one being the inverted U theory. And I've just got this picture here which shows both, but I'm just going to concentrate on the drive theory here. The drive theory relates performance to arousal. When an athlete has the necessary skills and their drive to compete, he's aroused by being psyched up for performance. So you see here by down the bottom, we're talking here about this dotted line. That's the drive theory there. So when their anxiety levels is low, their performance level is going to be low. But the more anxious they get, or the more psyched up they get for a performance, the higher up the performance level goes and the better they work, or the better they'll perform. For me, not personally, I really don't like that drive theory. I think it's got some limitations. The second one we look at now is the inverted U hypothesis, and this relates performance and arousal to an upside down U shape. The athlete will be performing best if working in the zone, and we're going to have a look at what the actual zone is in a minute, and the zone for optimal arousal, and at a point where they should be trying to be aroused for the performance. Performance will continue to drop off as the athlete moves further from the optimal arousal point. This is because the athlete sees an inability to complete the task the way that they want to, and thus becomes very anxious. Below the zone of optimal arousal, the athlete is also suffering from diminished performance characteristics by jerky movements or being slow to move, so a lack of motivation. It is affected by the athlete's decreased number of cues that can be used, lack of motivation, not being focused on the task, and being easily distracted or not fully knowing how to complete the task. So here we have our inverted U hypothesis. We spoke about on the previous page here about the optimal arousal. So what we're saying here, here's our arousal levels down the bottom, there's our performance. If our arousal is in the appropriate zone, then our performance is going to be of a high standard. If we're not aroused enough for the performance we're about to do, we're going to have a low performance. Lack of motivation, all those sort of things we spoke about, some cues. If we're over-aroused, so we're too pumped up, too psyched up for the performance we're about to do, again, our level of performance is going to be quite low. So, boys getting too psyched up. An example I give there would be Josh Cordoba. I've known him for a number of years, and he used to always walk around the shed as if he was about to rip someone's head off. He'd get himself in such a state when he'd go out and play a game of football, and he'd always come up with an error early in the game because he was just over-aroused. So Josh Cordoba was a very good example of that. But what we're aiming for athletes is, through training and preparation for the game, they've got to find their level of arousal that's going to work best for them to give them the best performance. So that's our inverted U hypothesis. What I want you to do in your books, boys, when you go through this in class and we talk about it, is I want you to draw the inverted U hypothesis, which you saw from the previous page. So we're going to draw this diagram here. And then I want you to explain for me how it operates and what this diagram means in your own words. Once you've done that, then I want you to include an example from a sport to support your explanation of the inverted U hypothesis. So we're going to draw this diagram here. You're then going to explain for me in your own words what it is, and which I've gone through already and done for you. But then I want you to pick a sport, whether it be Josh Cordoba, whether it be football, whether it be darts, whether it be cricket, whether it be soccer, whatever the sport you want to use. I want you to apply the sport to the U hypothesis to see how it impacts on the optimal arousal level. Following that, the question I want you to do is explain the difference between anxiety and arousal in terms of the effects on performance, and I want you to complete that in at least 12 lines.